Hey everybody, driving stream, Queensland, Australia is the state, the land of the Queen. Driving to the city of Brisbane. Brisbane is the third biggest city in Australia. Sydney was always the biggest, but from what I hear, Melbourne is on pace to outgrow Sydney in the very near future, and once that happens, it's probably never going to look back. If you look at the geography of Sydney, it's a lot of like bays and harbours, perfect for boats and sailing, but with a lot of hills around it and peninsulas and stuff, not really great for city traffic, that sort of thing. Melbourne is basically in like a circle surrounded by mountains that you can see in the very, very distance from the middle of the city, and spreads out all the way to the mountains that ring it and beyond. And Melbourne used to, when I lived there, had the lowest population density in the OECD countries, and basically in the developed world. So we have the most land around Melburnians, and obviously that leaves a lot of room for growth. Not only can the city continue to grow outward, but it can start to grow upward and become more dense as well, like most cities are. So Sydney can kind of only become more dense. It's very hard for Sydney to grow outward geographically. And then Brisbane definitely can grow outward. Like where I am right now is kind of the southern tip of the Sunshine Coast, so we're technically not in Brisbane right now. We're just outside of Brisbane, but it's close enough that, you know, if this isn't part of the city today, it will be in 5 to 10 years. They're looking at putting in some rail links and stuff. They've put in a ton of tunnels in Brisbane. Since 10 years ago, I used to be up here all the time. Like, I had an office in Springfield, which is to the southwest of Brisbane, near Ipswich, and that region there was the 5th fastest growing region in the English speaking world. In 2006, started a company there called Eco Living with a K, and we were doing smart homes. They had Telstra, which was the largest company in Australia. I don't know if they still are, but that's basically our version of AT&T, Telstra, and they were doing their fibre to the premises trials, and they had a golf course called Brookwater, which was designed by Greg Norman, and I bought a couple of sections around the golf course to build smart demonstrator homes. Ended up just reselling them as vacant lots. But I did set up a business there in the town of Springfield, selling smart home technology, and that was before anybody had ever heard of the idea of a smart city, really. But I sort of did see that there was an opportunity with this development, Springfield, to not just have smart homes around the golf course, but integrate it with the whole city living. And I'm not saying I was the only person that saw opportunities like that, because NEC, for example, they were also involved with Springfield, and Telstra was there long before I was. But anyway, this guy Maha Sinnathamby is a pretty interesting cat. He was born in Malaysia, but he was a Tamil. His parents, I think, were from Sri Lanka, and perhaps had to get out of there. But he was born in a mud hut in Malaysia with no electricity and no running water. And he put himself through a master's degree in property in Sydney as a taxi driver. Learned to speak English, learned to get a master's degree. Moved over to Western Australia and started a real estate business. And in a few years, he built up a fortune of, maybe $8 or $9 million. Very impressive. And then there was a property boom and he lost everything. So he moved his family over to Queensland and had to rebuild from nothing. And when I met this guy, he was a billionaire. I'm sure he's like a multi-billionaire now. but someone that I got to know, him and his family pretty well. Like, he was basically my business partner, bringing the smart home technology into his smart city. And he found a deal back in 1992 to purchase 6,000 acres of land from the army. It was just like unused training land that they were selling off. And so he bought this one massive parcel of land. So basically he has, one connection from this entire parcel to the grid. One electricity meter, one gas meter, one water meter. And if he wants to build a smart city there, he's got to build all the infrastructure to support a city of 150,000 people is what they were shooting for. This is 2006 when I started on this project. So I'm curious to go back there. If I get time in the next couple of days, I probably will do a stream driving through the Springfield area, and I'll be fascinated to see how much it changed. Like, this guy was quite a brilliant businessman. And I learned a lot from him, but I think I was way ahead of my time to trying to do the smart home thing, but it got the attention of Cisco, and they invested in my company now called Urbanize, which is a publicly traded company like Sausage Software was, and they were very interested in doing these smart cities over in the Middle East, where they're building what you might have heard of NEOM is the latest one, NEOM, in Saudi Arabia. It's going to be like the hub for artificial intelligence and robotics. Supposedly, you could go, Sophia, the AI designed by Jeffrey Epstein's team, will go make sure that you have a pleasant night's sleep by, managing your anger, fear, and pleasure centers through artificial intelligence that's always watching you wherever you go in the city. Now, if you like that vision of the world, go to NEOM. That's the deep state version of it. I was always hoping that within the world of smart cities, I could create something that was really the way things are meant to be, which is the open source philosophy. And just because the infamous RDS, Robert David Steele, is a proponent of open source philosophy, and his thoughts on that are things that I agree with and support, that doesn't mean that I endorse that guy at all, right? Far from it. But he espouses some excellent ideas in that book, the Open Source Everything Manifesto. He's definitely not the founder of the open source movement, and I think few would probably even consider him a leader of that movement. But he's definitely a thought influencer within it, and the concept of open source is that when I buy a copy of Microsoft Word, I get the application and I can use it as a typewriter, but I don't get the actual source code for the program. So if I wanted to change Microsoft Word and make that program better, I can't, because that source code belongs to Microsoft. It's proprietary, it's commercial, it's custom. And so they license it, and when I pay the money, I get a license to use the application, but I don't get to see the source. That's the closed source world. That's how most software is sold to governments, right? So you get these massive corporations, IBM and Accenture, and I don't need to name large lists of them, but those two are actually a great example, because they work hand in hand. And then you get the big consulting groups like the McKinsey's of the world. They're writing the report saying, hey, this is what you guys need to have. And then Accenture's like, yeah, here's what you need to have, and here's how you build it. And then IBM's like, yep, here it is. Here's how we'll build it. Here's the price. You guys get it, and then we'll keep servicing and maintaining it when you need feature requests. So that's kind of how software has been sold since, in World War II, IBM sold computer systems to every single participant, to Hitler, to America, to England, to Russia, to Japan. Anyway, that's a story for another day. IBM is something I've done a lot of research on. Better not miss my turn here. So, what was I talking about? IBM, World War II. Oh, how technology is sold to governments. Yeah, so after World War II, where they were using it for cryptography and also controlling logistics, it was taken and it was used for the education system in the Bay Area. And I'm hoping to do an interview with Prince Ray very soon talking about that. He's an expert on all that stuff. And, slowly it was rolled out to the big corporations, petrochemical, the Fortune 20 got it first, Bank of America doing automated check processing. And then over time, it starts to go more and more into corporations. And they had this thing called a PDP-8 from DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation. And that was like a sort of mini computer. It wasn't quite a mainframe. It was of a size where the school that Bill Gates went to could have one and he could play around with it. Bill Gates's mom, she was on the board of United Way, and John Akers was the chairman of IBM, and he was also on the board of United Way. And he's a Bohemian Grove guy, and there's a long history of IBM involvement at Bohemian Grove. Gates's mom on the board of United Way, chatting to IBM chairman, it's like, hey, my son, he's making this amazing software for these new personal computer things. And the IBM guy's like, oh my God, that's what we're doing. We're going to have our own personal computer, and we needed software for it. We need an operating system. And so she's like, yeah, no worries. My son will hook you up. And so Bill Gates, and Paul Allen have this thing called GW Basic, a programming tool, awesome programming tool. That's what I learned to program on the Commodore 64. And they don't have an operating system, but they know a guy in Seattle who does. So they go and license it from that guy for $25,000, which at the time, it must have been his dreams come true as a developer, that he could sell a piece of code for that sort of money. That wasn't a regular thing, but it turns out to be the business deal equivalent of Manhattan being sold, for a few beads and blankets, right? And then the value that was created out of it, because the Office, what do they call it? Yeah, they call it Office 360, I think, or something now. But that Office franchise has been called the most valuable product ever created. And the operating system itself, I think they've gone on to surpass the revenues for that. I haven't really looked deeply into Microsoft's finances, so don't consider me an expert on this, but my impression is that they make more money these days from Xbox than they operating system. And, that they've sort of reinvented themselves, coming back as a tools company, tools and games, which is interesting. Sell picks and shovels to the gold miners in San Francisco, or Levi's jeans. That they were sold to the gold miners, and that's a big San Francisco company. Big story there, that family. So yeah, the current system set up by big old money Bohemian Grove people, where IBM can sell software and systems to the government for large amounts of money, retain the source code. Well, IBM quite cleverly got into open source about 20 years ago. And if you look into the AIM channel, American Intelligence Media, with Michael McKibben and Douglas Gabriel, they talk about this Eclipse Foundation, and McKibben claims that basically they stole the proprietary technology that he'd developed for his company Leader, that they got access to through membership of the Eclipse Foundation, and that became the foundation for Facebook and social media, because it provided the scalability necessary for the system. Now, I was around at that time. Sausage Software used the Eclipse development suite. I don't think we would have paid any fees to be a member of the foundation, but possibly if there was any that we did join, it probably would have been that. We may have done it in the 2000s under Mairetsu, but definitely we used the Eclipse platform. I can't tell you I specifically recall Leader or McKibben, but I do remember wondering how Facebook did get that scalability technology, and particularly when they all of a sudden integrated the news feed. That was like quite a significant step up in functionality and complexity of the software, and it just all happened at once and without a glitch. And I don't know, I found that surprising. There wasn't the same sort of fanfare with it either as there is with, like, you know, when Microsoft released Windows 95, they had the start button, and they got the Rolling Stones to sing "Start Me Up," pay them like $12 million, and you know, they spent like maybe $200 million themselves, Microsoft, on the advertising of this, and then their corporate partners like Adobe and whoever, they spent another $300 million. So $500 million being spent to launch an operating system. That gives you an idea of how profitable this thing is once you get that operating system. So that deal that Gates did with IBM to basically monopolize the computer industry, but at the same time, IBM allowed them to have a horizontal model for this industry. So instead of just being a monopolist and dominating it, as you know, they very easily could do, because that's IBM from the inception of IBM. IBM is like a far more powerful company than most people realize. But it's instead of doing that, they said, oh, you know what? Let's help this young startup Bill Gates out, and let him go around the world, go to Asia, wherever, like get people to make computers to the same specification using the same software that are interoperable with our IBM computers. The only thing about them is that they'll be like a lot cheaper than the IBM ones and perform better. So that's cool, yeah. Why don't we create a market of competitors that are superior to us, in order that this little kid who doesn't even have the operating system can have the richest monopoly in all time? Like, do you guys sort of, you know, think there's maybe something a bit fishy about that story? That quite possibly the mom being on the board with chairman and the chairman going to Bohemian Grove could be a factor in that story. Zero-day exploits and backdoors in this operating system from the very first time when they shipped Windows 95. It had 36,000 known bugs in it, and they still shipped it. So how many classified bugs were in it that they knew about? You know, I mean, we know there's zero-day exploits that allegedly they don't know about, but how many get put in there deliberately by the deep state? I mean, that gets you into every computer network on Earth, basically, if you're using even their document format. You know, like a PDF file, you know, they can embed a virus inside a PDF file. They can embed viruses inside Word documents, macros, everything, you know. I asked Dave Acton about that. He's an expert, but I assume that those threats haven't gone away. If anything, they're greater than they ever were. You know, they're not building a system that is like completely secure, invulnerable for hackers, and will, you know, serve the country's best interests for all time. The only way to build that type of system is open source. Is if anyone can contribute, anyone can see the code, and anyone can contribute to making it better. And some of, you know, you would think, well, how can we secure government systems if everyone sees the source code? But the thing is that, you know, most of the security infrastructure and encryption technology, everything like that, is public open source anyway. You know, the internet runs on Linux and Unix and Apache, and these are all open source systems, right? Most of the internet is running on open source. So for the government to mandate it, it wouldn't change the internet in any way. Like most just admins would be like, okay, whatever, and keep doing exactly what they're doing now already, you know. But for the big corporations, for the Microsofts and the IBMs and the Accentures and everything, potentially that's really, really bad news, you know. There's large industries that have an incentive not to do it. And I'll give you one example is Sun Microsystems. I did a lot of business with George Webb, used to work there. Eric Schmidt used to work there. And they were very involved in developing this open source database called MySQL. And it's basically an alternative to Oracle's database software. And people would use it because it was open source and it was free. And they had a pretty big market share, like maybe 25% plus share of the database market. And all of a sudden, Sun's contracts dried up, and they had to go out of business, but they had such important infrastructure contracts at places that are involved in, you know, the high-level security of the US. that the company needed to be kept alive because those systems are critical systems. So IBM was going to buy it, and the government stepped in and said, no, that's just too much, no way. So instead they allowed Oracle to buy it. So Larry Ellison, already the richest man in San Francisco, Oracle had maybe like 60% market share of the database market. So then they acquired this other one that had 26% share. So they were basically handed on a platter for a price of about $1 billion, the entire database market of the world. And it's still open source. So, you can be proprietary companies and have open source technologies and things like that. But as a philosophy, if the government was to say all of our systems that we use, we share it with the public, and members of the public are invited to contribute code to make it better, over time, the systems would evolve to be better, because that's what open source software has shown since Richard Stallman is someone I would consider to be the founder and pioneer and early promoter of this movement. And Linus Torvalds from Linux, he is the hero of the movement. He's the poster child, and good on him. He's done some amazing stuff with his life, that guy. He didn't just rest on his laurels. But this is a proven model in the software industry. It actually leads to better software being developed. It still creates jobs, because people who become expert on these systems are of value to both government and private organizations. And people can create the jobs for themselves because it's open and free for the public to learn. So you can learn to code, learn to process the data, learn to participate in the open source community, make code contributions, get recognized for them, and then get gainful employment because you've been recognized for your code contributions. Like, to me, that's one of the absolute beauties of the internet and the developer community. It doesn't just apply to programmers. It applies to Storman. Jassy Joe, what's up? Huh? I thought I'd made you a mod, Jassy Joe. You were complaining about the mods the other day. I was like, isn't she a mod? Well, there you go. So anyway, these philosophies, this was all talked about on the internet a lot in the 1990s, right? There was a real sense that it was like a cowboy kind of frontier thing, and they were pushing this metaphor really, really hard. I mean, there's a mock design for the first ever cover of Wired magazine, and it wasn't used, and I'm surprised it wasn't used. It was pretty cool. But it's John Perry Barlow, and he's wearing his cowboy hat, and coming out of the cowboy hat are like basically this electronic web or net spanning the sky. And maybe it was just a little bit too literal of what was really going on, but the Electronic Frontier Foundation, Burning Man, Barlow, all of these things coming together around the same time, and the extension of the Grateful Dead scene as like one of the unifying social forces that was migrated out from the Grateful Dead, the Presidio, all that stuff I've been talking about on previous streams. I probably don't need to rehash that right now. So yeah, that's what I'm about, open source everything. So I think, don't just completely write off Robert David Steele because he said that slave children on Mars thing. To me, that's an information war attack, and he was an information warrior, and there he was in battle against Alex Jones. And I do think dealt a blow to Alex Jones. I think that was like did some damage to him. It certainly wasn't enough to knock him off course or make him lose, but a not insignificant blow at a time that was really quite crucial for him. So how did that strike come about? Is that did this information warrior just randomly drop that thing on the Alex Jones show? I don't believe that for 1 second. So therefore, who were they working with? Which for that guy is Frank Bacon, we know. William Binney says he meets once a month. Benjamin Fulford, you get to David Wilcock. And, I'm not saying those guys don't always have good stuff, but it seems like an information warfare operation to me. So therefore, anything they say, make sure you double and triple fact check it, do that anyway. Do that for anything I say. And let me know if you do that for anything I say and it comes up that I was wrong. Please let me know, and I bet you won't. But I've softened on Alex Jones. You know, I was such a mad fan from the moment that he offered video streaming. I think that was around 2002. You had to pay like $100 a year for it or something. I signed up and I would watch the whole show every day. And, you know, Alex Jones has inspired me in my life in a lot of ways. But it did sort of seem like around the election that, okay, this is a information warfare operation and it's been politically propagandized. And in that sense, you can kind of think of QAnon as a new decentralized Alex Jones, where sort of anyone can rise up to be the next Alex Jones, and maybe that's how they get selected. Like, it sort of seems like Corsi picked Patriot Soapbox, and that became the 24/7 channel. And yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so someone just asked, what's my thoughts on Jan Irvin? Yeah, I think it's... Did I lose you guys there? Is it working now? Can someone let me know if you can hear me all right? All right, sweet. So I was going to talk about Jan Irvin. Yeah, I think it's sad what's happened because the Trivium is such an important thing to promote and for people to learn about. And so that's part of why I chose Jan's show to go on to present my research for the first time was, you know, that I was lucky enough to be taught the Trivium in school. You know, I was blessed with a classical education, and it teaches you how to think. You know, you have to get the grammar first. You look at the facts, you look at the evidence. If you make sure you're speaking about the same thing, you know, if somebody says forced himself off a bridge, is that the same as was meditating in the sun, lying on a railing, and then peacefully leaned back over the bridge? You know, is that the same as two teenagers struggled with him as he was throwing himself off a bridge? You know, all those, the wording of those different things is important. And then two teenagers, well, how old were they? Well, they were 20 and 22. Oh, okay. So in that case, why would you describe them as teenagers? And they were also, their dad was like the local cop. Oh, okay. But that wasn't worth mentioning in the story. And one of them's like a fireman, and the fireman was the first on the scene. And okay. And then Tom Hanks does an Instagram post, mysterious death roadkill on historic Route 66, Cap P, with some specks of blood on it. And that's, you know, so that's great examples of grammar. All of these things, you assemble them. And so Tom Hanks' Instagram post, that's not evidence. No one's going to go, you know, arrest Tom Hanks for an Instagram post, but holy shit, it's fucking suspicious grammar, don't you think? Like, I don't know. So this is how I approach studying things. I collect as much information as I can. That's the grammar, right? And then you apply logic. So, logically, why would a guy like Tom Hanks, an actor, want to kill someone like Isaac Cappy, another actor? Right? That doesn't make any sense, does it? Look into that. Like, oh, well, actually, Cappy called him out as a pedo and got international, worldwide, attention for it. So there's a motive. Okay, well, now we've taken a basic piece of information that could be meaningless in itself, and we've applied logic, and we've said, well, you know, further investigation says if there's a motive, then maybe we need to take this possibility more seriously. Is there any other evidence that things are not quite right with a story, you know? And that drives the investigation. And then the last part of the Trivium is rhetoric, which is how do you explain that to people? And rhetoric is where the Trivium can be weaponized, and, you know, it turns into sophistry, and it becomes used against people for mind controlling them. It's a form of lesser black magic. It really is a spell, and it's called spelling. And Jan Irvin even talks about this. So he knows what he's doing, and he's no longer, if you're going to teach people the trivium, you don't teach it to them by publicly demonstrating misuse of it and throwing it aside anytime you want, because it's either your paymaster changed, or you think you're going to get a different audience this way, or you broke up with a girl, or your research is leading in a different direction, or whatever. But you won't see from me these massive 180s. I mean, I'm not saying that I would never change my position. There are some things in life I've changed my position of. But you're not going to see one minute I'm saying that the Frankfurt School and the Institutes for Advanced Study and the Princeton Radio Project created the whole music industry and Columbia Records and the Beatles and everything. Like, all music is mind control, the Grateful Dead, the CIA, MK Ultra, that coming out of the social engineers of the Frankfurt School. Okay, and then 6 months later, you're like, anybody who thinks that a certain small country has anything to do with world affairs is crazy, because it's clearly the Arabs responsible for everything. Dude, I mean, are you fucking kidding me? Are you fucking kidding me? And then he says, look, I think people should really consider the government story about 9/11, and apply the trivium to it, and look at what, they'll probably be surprised at what they find. It's not like they thought. As in meaning that the government story is true. He had Albert Stubblebine on his show, the highest level whistleblower about 9/11 ever, the head of intelligence for the army, right? The head of INSCOM. He did forensic analysis of missile damage as not just his job, as the fucking head of all of the people doing that shit, right? Getting reports all the time from every freaking use of it, right? He's an absolute expert in it, and he said, no way did a plane hit the Pentagon in 9/11. And he said that on other shows, but he said that on Jan's show. And Jan never challenged him for that. Jan completely agreed with him when I knew Jan. So what would trigger someone to do a total 180? And, the way that he treated Holly is absolutely disgusting. It's one of the worst things I've ever seen on YouTube. I'll say it's worse than Jason Goodman. Like, I wouldn't think those words would ever even come out of my mouth. It's hard to imagine anything worse. But, yep, worse even than shutting down the Port of Charleston, what Jan did to Holly with that public slut-shaming. And all he needed to do was Google this woman's name before he married her, If you want to get married to someone you've met once or twice that lives on the other side of the country from you, you barely know them, but you're instantly getting married, why not Google their name? But, I'm concerned about his association with the Knights of the Crystal Blade. Look into that cult, Knights of the Crystal Blade, a bizarre Mormon offshoot. He had a guy from it on his show many times, and this is tied up to child sex trafficking, this cult. So, I hope that there wasn't some kind of trafficking situation going on with someone, instantly getting married to someone they've never met before. I'm not saying there was, but it's when you hear about stories like that, I think that you really, really have to think about it. And I found out about Titus Frost because Jan Irvin and Joe Atwill, and Joe is a very good friend of mine. I really have the greatest respect for Joe. I've been to his home. He's been to my home. We've met each other's wives, and they're just lovely, love people. And, the way that Jan turned on Joe was awful. And I stood up for Joe because Joe was being unfairly accused of of many things. Like, just because he went to Jesuit school in Japan when he was like a child doesn't mean that he's advancing the Jesuit agenda. I mean, if you look at, just apply the trivium and logic, look at Joe's book, Caesar's Messiah, that's completely against everything that the Jesuits believe. And so how is it advancing their agenda in any way, And Joe has been consistent, as have I, in exposing the Frankfurt School and this social engineering and this cultural Marxism. This is not a good thing. This Marxism is not a good thing, whether cultural or otherwise. Like the full-on Bolsheviks, promoting degeneracy in our society. God, I'm just thinking of, I don't know if you saw Aleister Conte's video. He did a satanic prayer for Bernie Sanders. Go check that out on the Marcus Goodwin channel. The psychic investor is praying to Satan for Bernie Sanders to be the president. So if that's your investment strategy, you know what? In this day and age, maybe that actually is the correct investment strategy. I'm not giving financial advice, that's definitely the opposite of any investment strategy I choose. I look for win-win-win things and things that are generative and make the world a better place. That's the life I want to live, and I don't see really how doing satanic prayers to Bernie Sanders is making the world a better place. It's mocking Christianity, just like Lestat with his video Left Hand Path. You see the same thing. It's mocking Christianity, and these people say, well, we don't believe in Satan. That's like some fucking fairy tale thing in the sky. We don't believe in your God either. We don't believe in any gods. We're atheists. We believe in science. People are allowed to have that choice. That's a reasonable choice, but it's essentially the same thing as what Satanism is about, right? Which is that since there's no God, you might as well make yourself God and do anything you can to become God and transcend your lifespan and become immortal. And that's the journey of these transhumanists. And I don't know that we can even fight against transhumanism. I don't know that that's the right thing. I think, if there's a way that we can peacefully coexist, I think that's a better outcome than Terminator, that rumor going around was on AIM, take it for what it's worth. I don't believe everything on there, but they definitely put out good, verifiable information a lot of the time. They're saying an insider source who dated Eric Schmidt says he has an army in China of 2,000 of these Atlas robots. Now, you go look at Google DARPA, or go to YouTube, look up DARPA, DARPA, Challenge 2015, and you'll see that the challenge then was for these Atlas robots to climb stairs and open doors and climb over rubble and stuff like that. And since then, they've learned to jump, to balance, to stand on one leg. You can now Google Atlas robot 2019 martial arts, something like that, and it will probably come up with what they say is a spoof, but it's one of these robots without a head doing karate kicks and shit. So this thing is, it's bulletproof, it's self-powered, it can jump, you can drop them out of planes. The capabilities of 2,000 of these things, a swarm of them. How are they going to stop that? Right? I mean, what military in the world is even prepared for 2,000 of Eric Schmidt's robots to come? So, I think that this shit's getting out of control. And then there is a whole religious element behind it as well. People trying to stir up a religious war and to say that that's because of their end times prophecies or whatever. Well, we know what war's for. War is to make money for the bankers. It's the same story every time. So Yarn's got all these IDF kind of guys around him. Looking to the guy Lloyd from South Africa. He's teaching martial arts, fighting systems and everything. It sure seems a little mossy, if you know what I mean. And then he's just saying that Israel's only number 34 in the list of countries that own assets. I mean, that is absolute sophistry, right? And he knows it. It's disingenuous. The issue is not that the country of Israel is in direct control of Hollywood as if it's like a department of Bibi Netanyahu. The issue is that within the 12 tribes of Jews and the various different sects of Judaism, which is not a monolith, as Alex Jones says, there are certain ones that control Hollywood, banking, insurance, fucking everything, the internet, and those people believe that everybody else is subhuman, inferior to them, the same as cattle, to be treated the same. So I don't know how anyone can call themselves a truther and support that agenda. And, to say that, actually the Arabs own everything and they're in control, and there's only like 16 million Jews and there's 1.5 billion Muslims, so nobody should look at them. Like, fuck that. Every single one of these religions needs to be investigated, in my opinion. Every corporation, every bank, like all of these structures. It's not working for humanity now. And if we give the people in charge, control of the robots and the AIs, I don't see how it's going to get better. Because we don't know how those AIs have been programmed. So that's why we need open source. All right, hey, thanks for tuning in, everybody. Good talking to you. Catch you later.